often that I remember thinking I love playing this was Magic Bus, and that's just because of the rhythm.
Pete Townshend is known for smashing guitars on stage, but what many saw as simple destruction, he viewed it as something deeper and more meaningful. Each broken instrument represented a statement, a form of artistic expression. His famous windmill arm swings during performances were like rituals or prayers. Townshend wasn't content with just playing rock and roll music in the conventional way. He constantly questioned the form and pushed its boundaries, trying to make it mean something more significant than just 3 chords and having a good time. Coming from an art school background, Townshend brought ideas that were too ambitious and complex for typical 3-minute pop songs. This led him to pioneer the concept of the rock opera, attempting to elevate rock music into a more sophisticated art form. He focused on themes of confusion, anger, and the search for meaning in a world that often seemed meaningless. His guitar playing wasn't just about creating sound or noise. It posed questions, sometimes screaming them out to his audience. Behind every powerful chord was a thoughtful intellectual who read extensively, studied philosophy, and genuinely believed that music had the power to transform people and even save them. The albums that Townshend cherished weren't just records he enjoyed listening to. They served as evidence that rock and roll music could be legitimate art, that loud music could also be intelligent, and that acts of destruction could actually be acts of creation. 7 particular albums showed him various approaches and gave him the courage to experiment with his guitar and amplifier. These records demonstrated that rock music was still evolving and being invented, and that he could contribute to that invention. Eddie Cochran's album from the late 1950s taught Townshend what attitude in music sounded like. This wasn't just rock and roll music. It represented teenage rebellion wrapped in a leather jacket. Cochran sang about cars, romantic interests, and not caring what adults thought about any of it. His guitar tone was sharp and dangerous, clean yet aggressive. When young Townshend heard this music in London, it revealed to him that rock music belonged to young people, not their parents or the previous generation. It was about the future, not the past. Cochran made rebellion look effortless and cool. Songs moved with speed and confidence. His vocal delivery had swagger, and his guitar had bite. His image was complete with a leather jacket and slicked hair, embodying the rebel that every young person wanted to become. Townshend paid close attention to all of this. He learned that rock and roll wasn't merely music, it was also an image, an identity, and a way of expressing who you were without needing to speak. The energy in Cochran's recordings felt alive and dangerous, like anything could happen at any moment. That wildness resonated with something deep inside Townshend. Later, when The Who performed explosively on stage, when Pete did his windmill moves and attacked his guitar, the spirit of Cochran was present in that teenage fury and refusal to be controlled. Cochran taught Townshend that rock and roll was fundamentally about being young, angry, and alive, and that those 3 qualities combined were an unstoppable force. John Lee Hooker introduced Townshend to darkness and raw blues stripped to its essence. Hooker's guitar had a growling, beast-like quality, and his voice was deep, rumbling, and hypnotic. He could sustain a single chord for an entire song, and one groove could pull listeners into a trance-like state. Townshend heard this power in simplicity, and it changed his perspective on music. He realized you didn't need complexity, you needed authenticity and realness. Hooker played blues that didn't follow conventional rules. His sense of timing was uniquely his own. The beat would shift and change like sand beneath your feet. His songs stomped with primal force and locked into grooves that seemed endless. Hooker wasn't concerned with showing off technical skill. He cared about feeling and making listeners feel something too. This honesty cut through all of Townshend's art school concepts and reminded him what truly mattered, the gut reaction, not intellectual analysis. What amazed Townshend was how much Hooker achieved with minimal elements. One guitar, one voice, sometimes just his foot keeping time. There was no fancy production or studio tricks, just pure blues power. Townshend learned that repetition wasn't boring when done right. It could be hypnotic and could serve as a powerful weapon. Later, when he wrote songs, he used this lesson. Simple musical phrases repeated until they burned into listeners' minds. Hooker taught Townshend that less could genuinely be more, and that one good idea played with complete commitment beat 100 clever ideas played safely. The Ventures provided Townshend with what amounted to textbooks on instrumental rock. Their music was all guitars communicating with each other, clean, precise, and exciting, with no singing at all. They demonstrated that guitars could be the star attraction, that melody did not require words, and that rock and roll could be both technical and thrilling. Townshend listened carefully and learned how to construct lead guitar lines and create parts that people would remember. Their songs featured simple melodies with great tone and driving drums. The Ventures made instrumental rock popular and proved it could succeed on radio. Townshend absorbed these lessons. Later, when he wrote guitar parts that sang without vocals or created riffs that became as famous as vocal choruses, the influence of the Ventures was evident. What Townshend particularly appreciated was their professionalism. They practiced until they achieved perfection. Their tone was clean and bright, with every note ringing clearly. They showed him that skill on your instrument mattered, that technique should serve the music, and that you could be excellent while still rocking. His guitar solos on various songs came from studying bands like the Ventures. They taught him that the guitar was a voice in itself, and like any voice, it needed to have something meaningful to say. Ray Charles surprised Townshend by breaking every rule with his country and western album. He took country songs and infused them with soul, adding string arrangements and gospel feeling. He mixed musical styles associated with different races during a time when that was controversial. Charles didn't care about boundaries or categories. He heard all music as simply music. He heard this fearlessness and recognized someone who refused to stay within expected limits, who took risks that everyone predicted would fail. A soul singer performing country music shouldn't have worked according to conventional wisdom, but it was beautiful and heartbreaking. Charles proved that sadness and emotion had no color or genre restrictions. He showed Townshend that mixing different styles wasn't betraying music, it was evolution. You could take what already existed and transform it into something new and personal.
What changed Townshend's perspective was witnessing someone succeed by completely ignoring categories and conventions. Charles didn't ask for permission. He simply did what he believed in. That courage influenced how Townshend approached rock music. Later, when he incorporated opera elements into rock with his ambitious projects, the spirit of Ray Charles was present. When he mixed synthesizers with traditional guitars, that was Charles's influence. When he wrote rock songs with depth and real meaning, that came from watching Charles treat every song as if it mattered deeply. Charles taught Townshend that no type of music was off limits, that great artists borrowed from everywhere and made it their own, and that bravery and courage mattered far more than fitting into expected categories. Townshend chose his own band's first album not out of ego, but from genuine honesty about what it represented. The album captured something he would spend his entire career chasing: raw power, teenage confusion, and the feeling of being young and angry without fully understanding why. Before the ambitious rock operas and before fame became heavy, it was just four young men playing louder than anyone else and meaning every single second of it. The title track became an anthem somewhat by accident. Townshend wrote it very quickly. The vocal delivery stuttered as if the singer was too angry to speak clearly. The bass rumbled underneath like thunder, and the drums exploded in every direction. It wasn't perfect or polished. It was alive and vital, and that life mattered more than technical perfection. Townshend loved this recording for its mistakes, its rawness, and for capturing a moment before they knew what they would become. What made it sacred was the hunger behind it. They had nothing to lose and everything to prove. They performed as if their lives depended on it, because in many ways they did. Every song was a fight. Every chord was a statement. The album captured teenage confusion and pure energy with nowhere to go. It proved that rock music didn't need to be polite or refined. It needed to be truthful and authentic. The album taught Townshend his most important lesson: capture the moment and don't overthink things. Sometimes the first explosion of creativity is the best one. Stay hungry, stay desperate, and stay real. Brian Wilson's masterpiece in the mid-60s destroyed Townshend in the best possible way. Wilson had taken pop music and elevated it into genuine art. He layered voices into heavenly harmonies, used instruments that nobody expected in pop music, and created emotions that had no simple names. The songs dreamed about the future, captured perfect loneliness, and created what might be the most beautiful love song ever written. Townshend listened and realized he had been thinking too small about what was possible. Pop music could be profound and meaningful. Wilson's arrangements were incredible, incorporating instruments like French horns and harps into rock songs, using percussion that sounded like toys, and stacking voices until they became instruments themselves. Everything served the feeling and emotion. Every choice was deliberate and intentional. Townshend studied this album like a blueprint, examining how Wilson built songs from tiny pieces, how he used the recording studio itself as an instrument, and how he made sadness sound beautiful. What hit Townshend hardest was Wilson's courage. He already had commercial success and could have continued making the same type of music forever. Instead, he risked everything to create something deeper and more authentic. Critics didn't understand it initially, and some fans were confused, but Wilson made it anyway. That bravery directly inspired Townshend. Later, when he wrote his own ambitious projects and people said such things couldn't work in rock music, Wilson's example was there, encouraging him to do it anyway. The album taught Townshend that ambition was necessary, that pop music deserved to be taken seriously as an art form, and that beauty and complexity could exist within short songs. Wilson showed him the door to new possibilities, and Townshend kicked it down. Townshend's #1 choice surprised many people. It was an album from the late 50s featuring no drums, no bass, just two voices and two acoustic guitars playing traditional folk and country songs. While The Who became famous for smashing instruments and playing louder than anyone else, Townshend treasured this quiet, gentle album because it showed where harmony originated, where beauty existed before electricity and amplification, and where songs lived before anyone made them famous. The two brothers sang as if they were one person with two voices, achieving perfect harmony and timing. The songs were gentle, sad, and told dark stories simply. They sounded like home, even if you had never visited the places they described. The brothers didn't need volume to be powerful. Their voices carried all the power required. Townshend learned from this that intimacy could be as strong as aggression, and that two voices together could communicate more than one voice alone. What made this album precious to Townshend was its purity and simplicity. There were no production tricks or studio magic, just two brothers singing songs their father had taught them, passing music down through generations. That tradition mattered deeply to Townshend. He understood that rock and roll didn't appear from nowhere. It came from folk music, country, and blues, from people singing together across generations. The brothers reminded him of those roots and that connection to musical history. This album taught Townshend that both destruction and creation mattered equally. You could smash guitars during evening performances and treasure quiet harmonies in the morning. Knowing where music came from helped you understand where to take it next. Townshend never stopped learning from music. These 7 albums taught him about power, beauty, courage, and craft. His famous guitar windmills were prayers and rituals learned from studying these musical masters. Each album opened a door to understanding something essential about music and artistic expression.